Hello, I'm Paul Cook. I'm the Advocacy Director for Tearfund, and a very warm welcome to the Eco Bishops Conference. We're really thrilled to be working in partnership with the Anglican Communion Environmental Network to host this event. Our prayers are very much with you, and we pray that you will really meet with God in these few days together. You'll have some fantastic discussions together, and that you'll come away from here with a real sense of vision and direction for where you want to take the Anglican Communion on this important issue around the environment and next steps. Tearfund is a Christian relief and development agency based in the UK, and we're working in over 50 countries around the world, working through local churches to address the extreme poverty where we see it and find it in those communities. So why would we care about these issues like the environment? Why on earth are we interested in this stuff? Well, in 3 years' time, Tearfund is going to turn 50, and as we approach that milestone, we've been looking back at the last 50 years and seeing how poverty has changed around the world. So where have we come from, and where do we need to go next? Now, in many ways, it's been an amazing story of transformation. So between 1998 and 2008 alone, we saw the proportion of people in the world living in extreme poverty cut in half. That's faster progress than at any other time in the whole of human history, a really encouraging story. And most of that's happened through nations developing their economies. We used to live in the world of the West and the rest, but now we much more live in the world of emerging Asian nations and thriving African economies. So the lessons from history seem pretty clear, right? We just need to see nations develop their economies in order to see poverty reduced around the world. Well, no, unfortunately, there's a tragic paradox. Those same economic policies that have reduced poverty for so many around the world and have sustained those of us living in the West in our own lifestyles have also driven two huge problems of environmental destruction and increasing inequality. We now know that those economies that are driven by a high carbon, high consumption lifestyle are leading to all kinds of problems like climate change, pollution, water shortages and stresses on land use. In the last 40 years alone, the Earth has lost over 50% of its wildlife. If we carry on at that kind of trend, how long is it before human life itself begins to be under threat? And then there's inequality. Whilst extreme poverty has been reduced, we see growing inequality around the world, which is leading to greater social injustice and huge social tensions. It's now estimated that the top 1% of the world's population earns the same as the rest of the 99% put together. So where do we see God in all of this? Well, we believe that he would want an economy that still reduces extreme poverty, but also protects his beautiful creation and doesn't result in crazy levels of inequality. We've been really inspired by going back to the scriptures and looking at how some 3,500 years ago, when God's people entered the promised land, already then he was setting out rules for how they should run the economy in their day in order to provide those very things. So as they entered the Holy Land, the land was distributed equally amongst his people. He then instituted laws and rules that protected the widow, the orphan, the alien, those who were marginalised, the very poorest in society. There was a periodic reset where the land was allowed to lie fallow every 7 years in order to rest and recover and replenish his creation. And then, of course, every 50 years there were the famous years of Jubilee, when any inequality that had built up was wiped clean and people were able to start afresh again. So inspired by those biblical principles, next month we're launching a major report called The Restorative Economy that begins to think about what our economy would look like today if we took and applied those principles that the Bible lays down for us. That begins with 5 key things that each of us can do in our own lives in order to live this out ourselves and be the change that we want to see. But it also has 10 big ideas for governments and policymakers of things they could do that would take us a long way towards an environmentally sustainable restorative economy. Now, all of that, of course, is a very big vision. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and it's not something that we can just leave to politicians and business leaders to do for us. It's going to involve all of us, and it's going to start with the ordinary people like me and like the people in your churches and in your diocese. Jesus chose fishermen and tax collectors to found his church and to change the world. When Paul was speaking about the early church, he said, "Not many of you were wise, not many were noble, not many had influence, but God chose the weak things of this world in order to shame the strong. He chose the foolish things to shame the wise." And we believe that God is still in the business of raising up ordinary people around the world in order to bring about the change that he wants to see in his creation and in his world. And that's why next month we are also launching a major new campaign called Ordinary Heroes, seeking to see the ordinary heroes in our churches today who can begin to live this stuff out and campaign and hold their governments to account in order to see real progress towards a truly restorative economy that keeps us within safe environmental limits. So as well as launching this new report and launching our Ordinary Heroes campaign, we're also working with partners and churches around the world to think about what a global version of that campaign might begin to look like. How can we come together and figure out what needs to change in our lives and for our governments and for our businesses and work together to campaign to make that a reality? So that's what we're doing, but of course we're only one small part of a much wider global movement. Now the Anglican Communion with its 80 million members is of course a much bigger part of that movement. And as you meet together this week to consider the role that you play in addressing the environmental hazards the world faces, we'd love you to think about perhaps 3 areas. Now the first of those would be, what's the message that we can take to our diocese, to our churches and to individual Christians about how they can pray about these issues, about how they can change their own lifestyle so that they are consuming and living in ways that respect God's creation. And also how they can think about how they can use their voice, how they can use their vote, how they can campaign and hold their governments to account where that's a possibility, so that we can see political leaders doing the right things on this issue as well. That's one whole area. Perhaps another area to consider would be the role that bishops and archbishops can play in directly speaking to the world's global media and directly speaking to political leaders and bringing the moral authority that they have on these issues. And finally, as we seek to explore this idea of a global movement and a global campaign, we'd love to continue to journey with you on that and see what role the church can play in shaping and leading that whole debate. We pray that you will have a fantastic few days, that you will have really stimulating conversations, that in your time of worship and discussion, you'll have a real sense of God's voice leading you and setting clarity on the way forward. And we pray that you'll go away from here with a really clear sense of a positive agenda for change for the future, and that it will be ambitious, and we look forward to working with you on that as you go. Our prayers are very much with you. We hope you have a fantastic time.